Hello, my name is Kirsten Hannam. I'm a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-food Canada located in Summerland, British Columbia. My co-authors and I were really excited by the invitation to contribute to the plenary session. The title of our talk is Above All, Do No Harm, Co-Development of Cover Cropping Strategies for High-Value Tree Fruit within a Living Lab in British Columbia, Canada. My collaborators on this project are also co-authors on the presentation and include representatives from the BC Fruit Growers Association, the BC Wine Grape Council, Agriculture and Agri-food Canada, and UBC Okanagan. But first, I'd like to introduce the Agricultural Climate Solutions Living Lab program, which is a $185 million program administered by Agriculture and Agri-food Canada. It supports 14 living labs across the country. These living labs aim to support farmers, scientists, and sector stakeholders working together to co-develop and test new or novel management practices on farm with the goal of reducing greenhouse gases, sequestering additional carbon, and promoting various co-benefits. The British Columbia Living Lab is the westernmost living lab in Canada. It's funded primarily by Agriculture and Agri-food Canada, but is delivered by the Investment Agriculture Foundation of British Columbia, with additional support from the agricultural producer groups that are participating in the Living Lab. These represent a diverse suite of agricultural commodities, including forage beef producers in the south and central parts of the province, forage dairy producers in the Okanagan and Fraser valleys, field vegetable, blueberry, raspberry, and hazelnut producers located in the Fraser Valley, and apple, cherry, and wine grape producers in the Okanagan Valley. So we're going to talk about tree fruit in the Okanagan Valley today. If you're from British Columbia and you hear the words Okanagan Valley, you're going to think of two things: sunshine and fruit. And it's because of that sunshine that the Okanagan Valley is traditionally considered the northern limit of commercial tree fruit production. Tree fruit forms a really important part of the Okanagan identity. Orchards in the Okanagan Valley are planted as alternating strips of crop or tree rows and drive rows or alleys. Most attention is paid to soil in the crop row, which receives regular inputs of water, fertilizer, herbicides, while the drive row is mostly ignored. Some orchardists might irrigate them a bit and mow them sometimes, but they're primarily used to facilitate tractor access to the trees. When we talk about cover cropping in orchards, we could be talking about managing the species composition and productivity of vegetation in the crop row, in the drive row, or in both. Although some Okanagan grape growers have been experimenting with cover cropping in recent years, there's limited local expertise on cover cropping within the tree fruit sector. Given the high cost to establish orchards and the fact that it can take 3 to 4 years to reach production, there tends to be a low risk tolerance among tree fruit growers to try new practices. Although the BC Living Lab was launched in 2022, my co-authors and I actually met with individual fruit growers who are interested in the Living Lab for the first time this January at a workshop organized by the BC Fruit Growers Association. This workshop had 3 main goals. Number 1, introduce the Living Lab concept to individual tree fruit producers. Number 2, present local research on cover cropping. Number 3, identify farmers' priorities, their questions, their concerns. And right away, we identified several barriers to cover cropping by tree fruit producers. These included questions on how to actually do cover cropping from a logistical perspective. There was also some skepticism that cover cropping research in wine grape was relevant to tree fruit producers because of different challenges and different management objectives. And there were also a lot of questions about the potential risks of cover cropping and the potential rewards. So we came away from that introductory workshop with a bit of a to-do list. We needed to compile resources for the Okanagan tree fruit producers so that they could make decisions for themselves, and we needed to identify interested farmers so that we had a better sense of where they were located, what they were growing, and what their particular challenges might be. After the workshop, the BC Fruit Growers Association formed a working group that included all the co-authors on this presentation. Our main goal was to address the action items identified in the workshop. In April, we presented to the tree fruit producers who were interested a webinar that shared information on how to select seed mixes, where cover crop seed could be purchased, how to prepare their orchards for seeding, where seeding equipment could be rented, and also the possible risks and rewards of cover cropping in orchards. We also compiled a list of farmers who, after hearing all this information, were still interested in participating in the Living Lab. We started visiting each farmer on their own farm to learn more about their questions, their concerns, and their priorities. In the end, we decided to work with 2 growers in year 1. These growers are located close to the research center where I work, which made it easier for us to visit. We've used this year to refine our communication, data collection, and site visit protocols, and we hope to expand to other farms across the Okanagan Valley next year. So let's take a look at the farmers that are participating this year. The cherry producer who's participating in the Living Lab is growing 2 varieties of cherry, Lapins and Sweethearts. This orchard has a very close canopy. They irrigate the orchard with micro sprinklers, and despite the fact that the water is thrown into the drive row vegetation is naturally quite low density. This is because of the very closed canopy of the orchard. So the participating farmer's primary goal is to increase biomass production of the vegetation in the drive row because they want to periodically mow it and blow it onto the soil surface in the crop row as a way to improve soil organic matter, increase soil moisture retention, and facilitate nutrient cycling. Their secondary goals are to reduce soil compaction in the drive row, lower nitrogen fertilizer needs, and alleviate powdery mildew pressure. They chose to tolerate the risk of little cherry disease that might be associated with planting broadleaf species in the drive row. So now you're probably asking, what is little cherry disease? Little cherry disease has 3 main causes: Western X phytoplasma, which is a kind of cell wall-less bacteria, little cherry virus 2, and little cherry virus 1. Back in the 1930s to 1970s, little cherry virus 2 caused massive damage to the BC cherry industry. Many orchards needed to be pulled out because of this virus, and growers are really concerned that this not happen again. Western X phytoplasma, which is vectored by a leafhopper, is expanding in Washington state, which is our neighbor to the south. And growers are really on high alert for any evidence that this disease has made it across the border. Many broadleaf species, as I mentioned, host the leafhopper that spreads the Western X phytoplasma, and there's been some discussion that perhaps cover cropping with grass-dominated mixes might be used as a protectant against little cherry disease in BC orchards. This is really important because if little cherry disease is found, the trees have to be pulled out, which would be an absolute catastrophe for any grower. And we want to make sure that any research we do with growers is not going to be seen as promoting or is not going to promote little cherry disease in their orchard. The apple producer is working in a very different system, as you can see in this photo. They're growing 2 varieties of apple, ambrosia, which is a red and yellow variety that's really common in the Okanagan Valley, and SPA 1080, which is a pre-commercial variety of apple developed at the research center where I work. This orchard is irrigated with drip irrigation, and water is not thrown into the drive row through the summer. As a result, you can see that the drive row vegetation really goes dormant and turns very crispy in the summer. And that relates directly to the participating farmer's primary goal, which is to reduce albedo in the drive row to prevent sunburn. The grower hopes that by planting varieties that will stay green in the drive row despite the hot, dry conditions, that there will be less light reflected back into the tree fruit canopy, thereby preventing apple sunburn. Their secondary goals are to improve soil aggregation, reduce soil erosion, and also support pollinators, because not only do they grow apples, but they keep bees. However, they're anxious about the loss of control over nitrogen nutrition if legumes are introduced or soil organic matter is increased through cover cropping. So, what do we mean by that? Tree fruit producers in the Okanagan Valley tend to keep soil nitrogen availability in their orchards really low, particularly late in the season, because high nitrogen availability is associated with all kinds of fruit quality disorders and insects and disease such as bitter pit, fire blight, mildew, and aphids. Careful control of nitrogen availability is also used to promote fruit coloring, which is very important in ambrosia apples. The more red the ambrosia apple is, the higher the price that will be paid to the grower. And we want to be careful that any management practice we recommend to this grower doesn't compromise their ability to make money. So where are we now? The cherry orchard was seeded in June 2023 with a mixture of 3 grass species, 3 legume species, and 1 annual brassica species. The seeding process involved really active participation with a local contractor who was used to seeding cover crops in the wine grape industry. They worked really closely with us and with the farmer to make sure they chose equipment that didn't damage the trees and that achieved the desired seeding depth and density, which you can see they're checking right there in that photo. Although the seed was planted a month before harvest, miraculously the cover crop looks really great now, and you'll see a picture of that at the end of the presentation. In the end, we decided to defer seeding in the apple orchard to early spring because of concerns about soil moisture availability. It's been a really dry fall. We're still making final decisions on the species that will be seeded, but it may include tall fescue in the drive row and or woolly thyme in the crop row. Both of these species should stay green through the summer, and the woolly thyme has the added bonus of flowering shortly after the apple flower ends, which could be great for bees. Agriculture and Agri-food Canada is particularly interested in the effects of these management practices on soil organic carbon and nitrous oxide emissions. So we as research scientists are monitoring these variables, but the growers are interested in other things. So we also have an active program to monitor cover crop establishment and productivity, which is what these researchers on the left are doing. We're monitoring crop yield and quality, tree nutrition and growth, changes in orchard microclimate, various indicators of soil health, as well as incidents of pests and pollinators. So in summary, the British Columbia Living Lab brings together farmers, research, and industry representatives all together in one group to actively co-develop practices through on-farm experiments. This could be really important for growers of high-value crops who may be particularly averse to trying new practices because of risks to their investment. Active engagement with farmers and other industry stakeholders during the design and implementation and monitoring of on-farm experiments is really required in this case to, above all, do no harm, which is ultimately our priority objective. And with that, I thank you for your time.